verdict. Do you think that we should be in any way, shape or form even discussing things like bringing back the death penalty when we get cases like this?
Well, look, I think first of all, there's a lot of context, obviously, that'll be once sentencing is declared around the case itself that will need to be aired. You've also, Patrick, just touched on what the family's wishes are as well. This is a deeply, deeply horrible, appalling, abhorrent and traumatic case for those families that have lost their babies. It is a horrible case. The one thing I would add, though, is that the government has in recent years changed our laws for individuals that are effectively deemed to have been involved in murdering children and harming children. And it's important that we see those laws put into practice by the courts when it comes to sentencing. So we can't prejudge anything right now. My sympathies are so much with those families. I mean, there are no words really for what they have endured, the trauma and the heartbreak. And I really think we now need to let this follow the full judicial process.
We do. I think it opens up as well, though, Priti, some serious questions about what's going on in our NHS. The fact that concerns can be raised about someone like this, problems can be identified, and that nothing is done about it. And this is let to run and run and run. And I think the internal procedures of complaints within the NHS, that's got to be looked at.
Well, look, Patrick, I completely agree with you. And, I'm a member of Parliament in Mid-Essex. And, all MPs represent their constituents when it comes to the NHS. But sadly, and I say this with a very heavy heart, a lot of, the complaints that come to us are literally that, complaints about either access or services, their own personal experiences. And it's heartbreaking. It is absolutely heartbreaking because they want to know the truth. What happened? Why did things go wrong? So there has to be now, and I have no doubt my colleague, the Secretary of State for Health, will be following this with a great deal of interest. There'll be all sorts of questions regarding the NHS Trust itself, the governance, what procedures did they follow, and effectively, what lessons will be learned. Lessons will have to be learnt out of this. And personally, I think there must be greater calls for transparency within large organisations and institutions such as the NHS. We have a similar, not quite similar case, but we have a statutory public health inquiry that has been announced into our own mental health trust, where sadly families have lost loved ones, and we hope now that will bring some justice for them. But the question has to be, why are we going through these lengthy processes to get answers to their questions, sometimes years and years or even a decade after they've lost their loved ones? That is simply not acceptable.
Hot on about that, because we've got the victims' families here, and some of them, by the way, are dealing with 24-hour care for some of Lucy's victims who did survive. They can't be asked to sit through years of an inquiry. And also the general public need to know. You need to know if you're going to go into that hospital or anyone else and have a baby or be looked after, that there aren't people like her rampaging through the corridors. But Priti, if it's all right with you, I will just ask a couple of points now about what we were originally supposed to have you on, which is about RAF Wethersfield and the ongoing situation that we've got there with the migrant crisis and the asylum centre that is there. It's been a very, very, very controversial centre, this, OK? We've had people coming in, some people being removed, and as far as I can tell, it looks as though if you are claiming to be the victim of human trafficking or people smuggling or modern slavery, then we can't even house you in bases like this. What's going on?
So I think that's you've just asked the question because we're trying to get answers ourselves, as the Member of Parliament, one of the Members of Parliament for the district that is, caters for Wethersfield and is housing Wethersfield and this site. We are not getting straightforward answers from the Home Office. And of course, this is simply not acceptable. Actually, I personally think it's just wrong, quite frankly. Government departments and ministers must be held to account for the decisions that they make, but actually what is going wrong. And I think, Patrick, there are so many questions where we still need answers because, it is a fact, my local authority, Braintree District Council, we spoke about this previously, they are taking the Home Office to court on this particular site because of the type of planning conditions and the way in which they've gone about developing this site. They claim it's an emergency use of this site. And then earlier on this week, thanks to a national newspaper report, we discovered that this site is going to be used for 5 years, when actually we were in court and the Home Office had told us publicly that this was an emergency use of this site, and now that case is falling apart. Secondly, we're not getting honest answers about some of the issues around health screening, capacity around screening. I think last time I was on your programme we heard that there'd been a health outbreak. There are issues around what the local authority has been told or hasn't been told around environmental concerns and consideration of the site. I've also heard locally from my stakeholders, so these are statutory bodies, even from the fire service, that they have not had full reports from the Home Office. So these are, the list is never ending now in terms of questions. But fundamentally, it's local people, local community and local councils that are having to bear the brunt of all of this. And if we're not getting transparent and honest reports and accounts from the Home Office, and it just ties everyone's hands. And at the same time, I have to say, it does not lend itself to giving a great deal of confidence to the national policy approach that has been taken nationally by the government. And, I think these are both serious issues. All of this is serious. This is not a straightforward, stopping the boats is not simple and straightforward. It is complicated. As you have reported many, many times, cases end up in the courts. People claim modern day slavery. I'm more than familiar with those types of claims and cases. But at the same time, we have to get the basics right. And we saw last week as well, there were problems in alternative accommodation with the Bibby Stockholm. It's better to do the due diligence, the forensics, and get the basics right, so that actually even our local communities and our councils have some confidence and transparency as to what is going on.
Just one more quick one with you, if that's all right. Thank you for your time today. What would you do in the face of some red warning days that are about to happen, right, in the next couple of weeks, next few weeks? We're supposed to be getting this huge influx of people through. About this time last year, that's when we saw overflowing at the Manston Centre. What would you do now, right now, if you were Home Secretary, to make sure that we can deal with what is definitely going to be, another massive surge in the coming days and weeks?
So look, I think this is literally going back to working with the French. The government has paid enormous sums of money, something like £480 million to the French, and that therefore means that they are a partner. They can't simply, and in my previous time in office, we had conditioned a lot of the money, put performance metrics in, and we made sure that we were working with the French and in touch with the French when we saw red days coming. That is absolutely important, because it shouldn't be one way. My understanding is that colleagues in government are working with the French, but this is the moment right now. I think, Patrick, your programme and GB News, I've seen plenty of footage actually from Mark White, where we're seeing a concentration of migrants moving towards the northern shores in hope that they're going to be taking these boats when the weather gets better. This is where the French need to do more on interceptions. My understanding is, some of this money was going to be used for detention facilities. Why are they not arresting and detaining people rather than letting them congregate? These are the types of practical discussions that should be taking place. They may be taking place. I don't want to, be disrespectful to people in the Home Office, because I know how hard this is. I know officials in particular, both in the UK and on the French side, because there are UK officials, we have joint intelligence cells all working together. Quite frankly, they need to be really robust with our French colleagues. I think our embassy colleagues in France need to be in Paris as well, be very robust with their government counterparts in Paris and say, I'm sorry, but this is the bare minimum that we need. We need you now to be patrolling. We need you now to stop these boats from even manifesting themselves on the coastline. We need you to be arresting people and detaining them, because if they just move them on, they'll come back in a few days' time, and that's the type of activity that we need to stop, or at least disperse, until the French put the right resources in place to actually stop them from crossing in the first place.
Look, thank you very, very much. Always appreciate having you on the show. It's Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, giving her views on, well, initially, of course, that devastating Lucy Letby verdict, and then on to what's been going on in the Channel and what we can expect to come in the Channel as well. Interesting there. So, former Home Secretary, obviously not coming out in favour of bringing back the death penalty for cases like this. I know a lot of you are. I'm getting a lot of emails on this at the moment when it comes to Lucy Letby, who, if you have just joined us, has now been found guilty of 7 murders and 6 attempted murders.